Yes, we can. Go ahead.
All right. Well, thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Pedro Barreto. I'm from Crosslake Technologies. I'm a consultant, and typically my involvement with Modularity is around the architecture, and I'm here to help with the reference architecture and the V2 update. So you've always been hearing, a lot about the reference architecture for the past few convenings. I hope you by now know exactly what it is, or at least have a fairly good idea of it. We're not going to be focusing too much on what the reference architecture is today. We have really good news about what we're going to do with it, or the first step with it. Anyway, the agenda for this session today is we're going to start with an update on the reference architecture documentation effort. We have good news there. And next, we're going to talk about the vNext build effort. And we also have really exciting news. So the first step is Michael will give us an update on the reference architecture documentation. So I'd like to introduce Michael Wagner. Michael, please take it away.
Hey, everyone. It's good to be here again. And also echoing what Pedro said, greetings for the new year, and I hope it's a good one for everyone. It certainly needs to be. So let's get into this. So the good news is, as Pedro alluded, we have released the initial version of the reference architecture. Just a word that it's aimed more at a general audience than specifically technical people. It includes general audiences such as prospective clients, third-party vendors, or software vendors, and those kind of folks. Something important to bear in mind about the documentation is that it is going to continue to evolve iteratively. However, our main focus, as you will see, has shifted a bit. So with that said, let's get into it. And Pedro, if you could give me the next slide, please. Okay, so as you will recall, we reviewed our progress during PI 16, and there are just a few reminders from it. I want to just highlight some of the materials that we have been working on, and then we'll move on. So the working documentation that we used included Mirrorboard, for keeping a record of all of the BCs and UC flowcharts, or flow diagrams rather. We use Google Doc for capturing the design details during planning sessions, and we used a Google Sheet for capturing various types of data, including the common interfaces. So really quite a useful set of documents. And I have provided in the documentation, we've provided references to each one of these things. So don't worry about URLs at this point. The next thing to just highlight is that it has been built on ViewPress so that it follows the, I believe it follows the, the Mojaloop documentation standards. So let's just pop to see the landing page, and then we can move into the rest of the presentation. Pedro, could you just show? Yeah, okay. So that's what the new landing page looks like. So I don't know if it's up just yet, but it will be in the next couple of days, or even today, maybe. And when you see that, you'll know that you're into the new presentation, or the new documentation. Okay, so let's take a look at the next slide. We're going to flip through slides quite quickly because I don't have a lot of time to share with you. But just to highlight a few things. So the introduction provides a general overview of the reference architecture, the objectives, or really what it is, our objectives, and the benefits and information regarding the processes and how-tos of maintaining it. Let's just pop to the next slide, please, Pedro. And we've also provided information regarding the principles. I think, yeah, sorry, this was connected to the last slide. Let's go to the next one. That's my balls up, people. So that's the only one that's going to happen. Pedro, can we have the next slide, please? Thank you. So we've included some information about the principles that have guided our efforts, such as DDD architecture and solid principles. And you'll also find, as noted previously, an overview of all of the bounded contexts contained within the document. There are a couple that are still being reviewed prior to inclusion, like security and platform monitoring. But each BC section includes an overview of its function, along with descriptions and flow diagrams of all of the UCs associated with it, and any further reading or guidance references or guiding references were included. Finally, one of the sections that will definitely evolve is the one that you're looking at right now, which is the further reading. Currently, it includes, as I said, the references that the team used whilst building the documentation, and so you can go and take a look at it if you're interested. And that's the present. So what of the future? The next iteration is going to be, we've termed it VNext, for want of a better term. We thought it sounded quite neat, and it's going to be the initial release of the reference architecture 2. The documentation effort in this round will focus on providing developers with an in-depth insight and information on and how-to guides on how to use the new architecture and how to integrate their products with the Mojaloop platform. We're really excited about this next stage and hope that you are too. Thanks for your time. And now I'm going to hand you back to Pedro.
Thanks, Michael.
Cool.
All right, that was good news, and we have a bit, we have some more good news. So since mid-November, we've been working on the future version of the Mojaloop platform that we're calling VNext. As Michael said, we don't have a better name. Actually, we think this is pretty cool. Let's see what we call it later when we actually release it. And this is, of course, based on the architectural guidance of the reference architecture. So all of the work that we have put in the reference architecture to have that vision of what good looks like is now being distilled into an actual implementation that we're putting into VNext. To avoid the big bang approach to this VNext, we aim to deliver releases as frequently as possible. So as we presented in the last convenings, we have planned for different types of releases and a good cadence of releases. The first release that we're calling the alpha release. This is the, and we will explain what exactly alpha means and the releases mean later. The alpha release will be followed by one or more beta releases, and then finally a production release. So currently, as I mentioned, we're working on the alpha release. So let's recap what this alpha release is about and why it matters to have a release that is apparently useless. It is not. So as you know, the reference architecture is significantly different from the current version that we have in place. And that requires a few important structural changes. And it's more on the structure than on the functionality, obviously. It is also an opportunity to enhance the technical foundation of the platform, and this was much ado. This alpha release is mostly about these hard structural changes. Once we have this technical foundation, we'll add the most important features that the current version has, targeting obviously only the happy path functionality or use cases. So to recap, we wanted to have enough functionality so that it is relevant and it's workable. We wanted to be fully testable and providing the scalability or proving, sorry, the scalability of the design, but leaving the optimizations for later. We also want its components to have stable interfaces so that other developers can start contributing as soon as possible. And this is an important aspect. So this release is essentially targeted to developers. Our objective is that when we get it done with the hard changes that we have, and we get that done as soon as possible, anyone interested in contributing can do so on top of that modern solid foundation so that they don't have to do the hard, difficult things that we're working on now. So hopefully we'll have plenty of contributors migrating existing code and existing integrations to this VNext version once we release the alpha version. So we've been working on this since mid-November, which is not a lot considering that we had the holidays in the middle. But this alpha release work inside it, so the way we planned the work for the alpha release, we have three phases. We started with the design phase, where we designed the structure of the implementation in accordance to the reference architecture. Most of this work was done already during the reference architecture sessions, so that facilitated immensely the work that we did. We then started building the foundation and the cross-cutting concerns. Cross-cutting concerns are all of the bits that are not necessarily related to a single concern. So it's not related to transfers, it's not exclusively related to accounts or quoting. It's the stuff that makes the foundation important and working. And that includes activities such as the setup of the repositories, preparing the infrastructure and the CI pipelines. We did this already. Then we proceeded to the build of those cross-cutting concerns, and this is the stage that we're working on. So this includes the foundation for things like logging, auditing, platform configuration, and security. So those are the important aspects that we need to get right from the foundation so that we can then build on top of it without changing them. So next we will start working on the happy path code for the main usage cases. That obviously includes things like transfers, accounts and balances, participant lifecycle management, quotes, the interop API, and things like this. So we plan on releasing the alpha version around May, and immediately after, and because we're all now versed in the Greek alphabet, so this should not be a surprise for you, we'll start working on the beta version. And this beta version will be about completing the features that up until then would be, and during the alpha phase, will include the happy path only. So this is basically putting the meat on the bone, so to speak. Because at this phase, we will have a platform with stable foundations and interfaces, and I know I'm repeating, but this is an important aspect. We really expect to have some contributions from the community. So once alpha phase is released, please join in to contribute for the beta release, because what our promise is that when we get to that beta release, the foundation, the hard stuff is going to be done so everyone can start adding functionalities, and importantly as well, retrofitting whatever integration, whatever adaptation that we have today for the current implementations to the new code of the vNext, so that we can get those things ready as soon as possible when it gets to production time. Okay, and by the way, we're not going to call Gamma to the production version, so don't worry about that. We're not going to reach Omicron, I hope. So right now we have a couple of important objectives of this alpha release that we want to highlight. The first one is related to the importance of decoupling the valuable infrastructure code, the valuable business code from the infrastructure implementation. So essentially what we're saying is that the value of the business rules, the code that implements the actual logic that the switch needs to perform, is much more valuable than the infrastructure implementation. And this is important in more ways than we think. It has huge consequences in the future. And this is a simple thing in theory. In practice, it requires a good bit of design and discipline when implementing that code and when building that foundation. As an example of where we applied this, we can see the way we have built the messaging infrastructure code. And what we have is a common library that contains common types, such as the message structures, the message publisher, and the message consumer interfaces. And this is where we specify the data structures for the basic functionality. And then separate from that, we have multiple implementations of the actual technology that we can use for the messaging. And this is the part that's related to the infrastructure that we use. Included in the alpha release, we'll obviously have the Node.js Kafka client library, which is something that we build upon. So this separation will allow us to, if or when necessary, replace, for example, Kafka with another technology. Or for a more immediate scenario, replace the need for a Kafka cluster when we do some testing with messaging mocks so that we can fully test our code and have a good assurance of quality on it. So there's a lot of important, aspects and benefits to this sort of strategy and principle. So this principle, we would like to apply it to all of the infrastructure components, and all of them, really all of them, because it is possible, and this is something that we've studied and designed for. We know that some open source components that we rely on can change with impact to our platform, and we've seen that. Some changes might simply be a license that changed for whatever reason. Regardless, these changes might force us to perform some urgent and significant code refactoring. This is not ideal, or at least not ideal to do it in urgency. So enforcing this design principle will not only reduce this risk, but also gives us more flexibility to change, because we are able to change infrastructure without affecting that super valuable code. So this is one principle, and next Miguel will talk you through another objective that is even more important in our perspective. Miguel?
Thanks, Pedro. Hi everyone, I'm Miguel de Barros from Modularity. My primary involvement is part of the Mojaloop core open source design authority and VNext teams. So just continuing, so another key objective is to achieve modularity through abstractions and interfaces. We want to abstract the implementation specifics and complexities or detail from the application itself, and this will allow us to change the implementations with minimal impact to the application or platform. This can be done through the use of interfaces and dependency injection. This concept is very similar to a traditional API-first approach, but done at a code dependency level, where we define a standard interface and ensure that both the clients and services adhere to it. An additional benefit here is that one can choose to forego in using the standard VNext implementation client libraries or services that we have created, as long as they adhere to the standard interface. This means that the Mojaloop community will have the ability to contribute new clients and services easily, and it can be done once again with minimal impact to the platform itself. Let's take an example. We have a client library which is able to publish logs to our messaging infrastructure, such as Kafka, and we could have another more traditional logging client library which can produce logs to a standard out or a local file. A developer would simply choose the desired client library and inject it into the application, as both adhere to the same standard interface, and thus no impact to the application itself. It is even possible to have the application inject a desired client library through an external configuration if desired. This could be useful for development by providing mock implementations or even for debugging purposes. Similarly, we could have multiple service implementations. In our example here, we could have multiple services that consume logs from the messaging infrastructure and index them into several different backends, such as databases, Elasticsearch, or even Grafana's Loki. Alternatively, it is even possible that we can forego the service implementation and use a turnkey solution such as FluentD or FluentBit to process or index the messages into our desired data stores, as long as they can be configured to understand our standard interface semantics. On the left side of the slide, you'll see a picture which is a structure of our monorepo that reflects this pattern, specifically within each bounded context. You will find client libraries, services, etc. Within the modules folder, using a naming convention to identify their function. A last note here, which is slightly off topic, but I think good for completeness, is you also see a common module in some of our bounded contexts, and this is purely an internal library specific to the bounded context. Next slide, Pedro. And so on this slide, we actually have the current implemented VNext alpha repositories that have been worked on in the last PI, which Pedro previously mentioned on his update. You can use the shortened link below the image to access them from the Mojaloop GitHub org, or you can just go to the Mojaloop GitHub org landing page and add a VNext as your filter, as shown in the actual screenshot. Keep in mind they are still being worked on and are not currently feature complete, as indicated by Pedro. So on the actual picture on the left, you'll see we have the logging bounded context, we have the platform shared library, where most of our messaging infrastructure types, clients, interfaces exist. We have the platform configuration bounded contexts. And this is mostly where we inject our configurations such as host names, anything the applications or the platforms need to operate. We have an auditing bounded context, which obviously ensures that we're auditing what we need to audit and provide the library clients and services to be able to do that. Something that wasn't previously mentioned, we also have a Typescript bounded context template. And this allows us to easily bootstrap new bounded contexts with our monorepo tooling, basic structures, and standards. So as you have seen, we are basically grouping everything by these bounded contexts, and we have several actual individual Node.js projects based on the themes and the functionality as previously expressed. And we have monoreaping tooling to help us build, maintain it, test it, and even release and publish the individual components within those monorepos. Thanks, Pedro.
Thanks, Miguel. Yes, and these principles, they are, we have a few good principles from the reference architecture. We chose to highlight these two because we do think that these two are super important. So to recap them, the first one is the ability to design the next version of the platform so that we don't depend exclusively on certain infrastructure components so that we can change them. And the second one is that the way we design the platform allows the components inside and the multiple parts of the platform to be exchanged when we need. And this is achieved by having stable interfaces in the middle of those components, in the middle of those bounded contexts, so that we can achieve that modularity and extensibility. This is a really powerful concept that is, again, in theory, this is really easy to discuss. It's really difficult to implement, and it has far-reaching consequences especially when we don't have it in place, because extending a platform, adding functionality or changing functionality, which is obviously a constant of software development process, becomes really hard when we don't have this very clear boundary around the different parts of our platforms, and also stable interfaces. So really important update, and this is why we chose just these two principles. So we're coming to the end of our presentation, and as it's now a tradition, we need to cry for help. We really need help with developers. So we don't have enough developers working on this. We don't have developers full-time. We're making what we can, and we're really excited about this, and we do think that we're going to deliver on it. However, if anyone can help, this will be much appreciated. So I have to say that this phase requires a bit of dedication. So if you have some amount of time, some significant amount of time, not just a few hours a week, but a couple of days at least, then please reach out to us, because we have stuff that you can help with. Most importantly, after May, we will need help that's going to be a bit easier. What I mean by this is that once we release the beta, the alpha version, when we go to beta, it's going to be a lot easier for people to develop independently without having to be in the tandem way that we're doing it now. Now it's a really solid and involving development effort. So please, if you have time to contribute, significant amount of time to contribute now, please reach out. We need help. If not, if you have time in May or after May, then reach out as well so that we can start planning for that, because we will need help, all the help we can get to a good beta version. That is it from now. I think we have some time for questions because we were ahead of time. So
yeah, there is a Pedro, there's a question in the chat from Steve. Is there a plan or mechanism by which the current 4 implementers that Paula started the day with are going to start validating or testing the reference architectures to V-Next? Having real users is a huge advantage V2 has over V1. Steve, I don't know if you feel the need to clarify your question. I'm happy to let you unmute and then ask it again. Okay, no problem. So Pedro, the question is in the chat there.
Yeah. Thanks, Simeon. This is Steve. Thank you for the question. This is a really good question, and this is in fact a very important aspect to make it feasible. Because a lot of the times when we do software refactors, well, at least us technologists and geeks, we try to rebuild everything without a perspective of the practical world. This is why we phased this into an alpha release and then beta releases. The point of the alpha is that once we have the alpha, we have the foundation ready. So the complicated changes, the hard refactoring will be done. The software is not going to be ready for production, not at all, far from that, but it will be ready for those testing and the reference architecture technology to be tested, to be evaluated, so that people that have custom integrations that work in today's version of Mojaloop can start refactoring those integrations to target the new vNext version whenever it comes to production. So that is a very important thing. We hope that by May, people can start trying their code against the alpha release. If that doesn't happen, then we can wait for a beta release that will happen, I hope, a PI later. And that's going to be for sure a time where people can start playing with this reference, with this new vNext implementation. Does this answer your question? Sorry, Miguel, go on.
I was also going to say, just a segue for that, just as per Pedro's ask for additional assistance, I would also hope that the 4 implementers might be able to provide some actual resources development and actually have input directly into the alpha and beta developments as well. I think the earlier they are involved in that process, the better and the more direct feedback we would get as a result of that.
Yeah.
Excellent. I saw a thumbs up from Steve that his question is answered. I want to give any last opportunity for anyone who has any question or feedback. I don't see any hands or anyone unmuting or anything in the chat. All right, excellent. Well, Pedro, Michael, Miguel, thank you so much for the update on the reference architecture.